In late classical antiquity, it would not have been unusual to hear talk of a divine man or a divine woman. Across Europe and the Middle East, and indeed further afield, there were many examples of these godlike heroes, semi-divine heroes, Hercules, Mithras, even Caesar himself. Many of the Roman emperors were deified. And the fact that a historical person like a Roman emperor or an empress could become divine, even though they were acknowledged to have been born human, and be taken entirely seriously and worshipped across the Roman Empire, is not just testament to the fear and the awe that people held Roman emperors in. It's also testament to a particular notion of divinity, which is implicit in the idea of the God-man, which is rather different from that presented in the Christian incarnation. In ancient Indo-European paganism, which dominated the world that Jesus lived in, any person with a particular skill or potency or eminence could potentially be considered divine. They were seen to be closely linked to the occult and mysterious forces that lay behind the world of appearances, the gods and spirits. But these gods themselves, however, were actually quite similar to human beings. They were human beings written on a cosmic scale. They had the typical capricious, vengeful, petty traits that we see around us. They also had the usual kind of ambitions and desires, and indeed were involved in the conflicts that we associate with ordinary family and social life. They represented a cosmology in which whatever order there is in the world was seen as always on the edge of dissolving into violent chaos. And the solution to that violent chaos, which was inevitable, it was part of the way things were, was usually found in the form of some kind of supplementary violence, of a blood sacrifice of animals or even human beings, the sacramental murder, as it were, of a scapegoat, of something which could placate either the gods or the forces of chaos, or feed the natural world and keep the order of the cosmos in check, as it were. And so the Jews had a totally different cosmology. The Jews believed that the world was actually inherently peaceful and good, but had somehow been disturbed by a contingent historical event, a fall from grace that had introduced evil into the world. God himself was perfect, good, all-powerful, beyond reproach, alone and without equal, and far above the petty intrigues of human life. Now, logically, it's easiest to imagine this kind of God as radically distinct from the gods of the pagan pantheons, as remote, as impassive, inhuman, perhaps even alien, or indeed sublime. This kind of God becomes very easily almost an abstract entity, very close to being inconceivable, an infinite unitary being composed of no comprehensible substance. And what John does in his prologue is therefore doubly revolutionary. Firstly, he introduces the idea of relationship into the very being of God. He says that the Word was both with God and was God. It was identical to and differentiated from God. So he disrupts this kind of abstract, unitary being idea. And secondly, he says that this high, all-powerful, perfect God of the Hebrew Bible actually descended into creation, a creation awash with sin, without becoming, as the pagan gods were, compromised by this sinful world. Thus, in a few short sentences, he pronounces two things which, to the ancient mind of both the Greco-Roman world and the Hebrew, the Jewish world, were impossible. That there could be community within a unitary God, and that this unitary God could enter creation without becoming like it. And this in turn opens up the possibility that creation itself can be restored, and indeed, according to the gospel, the ingress of divine into the world that's represented by the incarnation of Jesus Christ is the beginning of this restoration. Now, this may sound like a lot of abstract theologico-philosophical nonsense that's interesting only to people who like to speculate at length about things which are incomprehensible. But it does have very real practical implications. If you believe that the world is always a hair's breadth from chaos and that violence is part of the solution to the chaos, your religion will focus on ritually procuring cosmic order, and your ethics on instilling the qualities necessary to preserve social order, so fortitude, courage, prudence, but probably not love, mercy, or forgiveness. You will probably see violence, and indeed what we would now see as repression, as simply part of the cosmic order, no more remarkable than any other natural phenomenon. Your worldview will centre on the idea of enjoying what is possible to enjoy now before enjoyment itself is snatched from your grasp forever, but doing so probably without upsetting too many other people in the process. And by contrast, if you believe that the world is fallen, but that there is a perfect God who resides in a remote and abstract realm of equal perfection, which is effectively the opposite of the world that we live in, you will probably prioritise withdrawal from the world. You'll emphasise purity from the contamination of anything which isn't within some tightly drawn circle of holiness. In all likelihood, you will despise the body and the family and sexuality and food as vehicles of damnation. The only thing in the world worth desiring from this perspective is to escape from it. However, if you believe that the world is fundamentally good, that violence and death are actually alien to creation, and that the creator of the world has entered into it in order to redeem it, and that its destiny is to be both created and perfected, then it begins to make more sense to live in anticipation of this future, to maybe even try to contribute to it in some small way. It's from this viewpoint that we can understand why, for Christians, the most important virtues are not at present orientated traits like courage or short-term future orientated characteristics like prudence, but they are eternity oriented virtues like hope and faith. The critical difference here is readily appreciable in our own time. The various emancipatory movements and radical technological developments that have changed human life so often for the better over the last few centuries are only really conceivable within a framework that dares to hope in things that it cannot even fully understand. If you'd suggested to an ancient Roman that slavery ought to be outlawed, they may well have agreed in principle, but at the same time probably would have argued that this principle was only applicable in a utopian world that didn't actually exist. The Christian might agree that such a world didn't exist, but they would add the crucial caveat, yet. And they could do this only because of the daring reality outlined by St. John, but manifested in the incarnation. Amen.